Time for us to begin. This is the afternoon session on Monday for caller coaches. I'm Arden Hopkin, and I'm glad to be here with you, and I don't know what I'm doing here. And so I thought we'd start off just with a little bit of question and answer, my question, your answer, about what you need this session to be. Any comments, thoughts, particular questions that you may need answering? Because I can have my own agenda and follow it through and take us where I think we need to go and not be where you need to be.
Okay, David Fullaway from Maui, potential caller coach. What things do we look for in analyzing a prospective caller's voice to make corrections for?
That's an excellent question that I'm not going to answer. At least not right now. Go ahead.
Scott Byers from Sacramento, California. I have a particular student who has an appointment with you, and you worked with her. She has a very pronounced nasal problem, and there are certain vowels that I need to get her to stay away from. I need to know which ones can I use as opposed to which ones do I need to shoot myself if I make her use those in vocal exercises.
That's an excellent question. I'm not going to answer this at this time. Any others that I'm not going to answer? Let's see.
Daryl Clinton in Portland, Oregon. I don't think that I have a lot of problem telling when the students are not breathing properly. I'm not so sure that I know all of the exercises that I'd like to know in order to get them to do that. And also, I'd like, if you can, include something about putting them on pitch.
As I was saying a moment ago, those are excellent. Good. I'm gathering information here.
John Felton, caller, Pocono Pines. As a caller coach, I want to know, I think we can identify the problems, but we may not necessarily know what actions to take in order to correct it without doing damage, other than to suggest that they go to a voice coach.
Not being desirous to put my colleagues out of business, I think you've got the right answer right there. No, actually, the truth of the matter is that I think that there's a possibility for our working together over a series of years where it will be possible for us to systematically cover issues that are of importance and arm you both with strategies for solving those problems, but more particularly to attune your ears to identify what the real problems are. Because sometimes that which you hear isn't the problem, it's the symptom of the problem. And if you don't know that and you correct what you think is the problem, you simply substitute one problem for another. And the underlying problem, the underlying solution is a little less obvious.
And just to add to that, when I went to my voice teacher the very first time, I'm Deborah Carroll Jones from Arlington, Texas. And when I went to him the very first time, he listened to me because I thought I was desperate. I knew something was wrong and I needed help. And he just said, you have a damaged voice and I'm not going to work with you until you get that voice fixed. And if he had worked with me at that particular point in time, he would have exacerbated everything. But he was trained well enough to know that it was a damaged instrument. And some of us, when we listen to a problem from another caller, the diagnosis is where we're lacking that professional part of our presentation.
That is part of the reason why I facetiously said I wasn't going to answer those things, because there is a certain amount of the underlying philosophy that goes with the medical profession, which is the first and foremost axiom is to do no harm. But then sometimes voice teachers, not wishing to do no harm, do no good. They're so careful and so cautious that they don't really get at the heart of the matter. And so this sort of leads to this thing that John talked about this morning in the opening session, in which I don't remember. Deborah, can you help me reconstruct? Was it that you and John proposed a progressive, or I proposed? I don't even remember how the dialogue happened a couple of years ago. But as we talked, we began to explore the possibility of having a kind of a progressive voice training program. And that voice training program would consist of a fundamental level. We didn't know what that fundamental level was going to be, and an intermediate, and then an advanced level. Or, removing it from that kind of terminology, a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. each one of them having a different kind of skill. I raised with the women in calling this morning a question that I want to pose to you, actually 2 questions, and I'm hoping that you can help me find answers. Here's option 1 in that scenario. The first level would be sound production. How do you make a basic, healthy sound? Right away, if you only have that much information, your callers and your own singing will be better than if you don't have that information. It isn't the whole picture, but it's the fundamental part of the picture that if you get it right, all of the other stuff comes along easily. That could be level 1. Just how do you make a healthy sound consistently? Level 2 would be to come back to what Scott was asking, what about certain vowels? And there are a variety of strategies to take the sound that a person is making and make it more finished and more beautiful. Part of which is how do you form vowels? What are vowels? How do you get them to match each other? And there are some pretty simple, straightforward techniques that can be used. Things such as, what about a clenched jaw? What about a retracted tongue? A bunch of visual cues that you can see, tension, and those are the ones that you can misdiagnose because they're just symptoms of a problem rather than being the problem. And if you go to try to solve the problem and don't solve the underlying one, you just substitute one for another. But the level 2 would be, how do you enhance the sound that's being made healthily? And the third level would be, how do you take that healthy sound that has been projected, that has been enriched and made beautiful, and extend it higher in the range and lower in the range and make it even so that there aren't little pockets of notes in a person's singing voice that disappear all of a sudden, or where they sing generally in tune but they hit a certain range and they can't sing those notes in tune to save their lives. There are some underlying mechanics in the vocal folds and the muscles that control them that if you understand them and know how to make application to them, you can solve those problems. So right off the bat, that's one potential way to do that. So you start out, first level is sound production, second level is a quick review of sound production and going on to resonance tuning. And the third one is a review of those and the introduction to range extension and evenness of scale. That becomes a very, very easy series of activities. There's another way to slice the pie, though, and that is to talk about competency. There is the competency says, I've heard it, I can do it sometimes, I understand it, but I can't do it habitually yet. So that's what I call a competent. Then there's that person that's gone from competency to consistency, where they understand it and have done it enough times so that it happens that way all the time as long as they're thinking about it. Of course, the minute they take their mind off of it, it degenerates into something else. And then the third and most significant level is habituation. So you can take these 3 skills, teach them all at the same time, so that you get a kind of an integration of skills, and then the certification goes from competency to consistency to habituation. Now, which of those 2 approaches do you folks feel like would be the most useful for yourselves and for your callers?
First, I think.
The first one gives information. Particularly, John's thought was, if we set up this enormously complex certification process, how are they going to get it done? It gets cumbersome. And I've had a number of ideas about that, ranging from me bringing one of my assistants with me to CALLERLAB each year, setting them up in a room, and just having them pass people off on their certifications. That just, you've got the instruction last year, you spent a year working on it, you come back and you pass it off and you get your certificate. Could be something like that. It could also be what they call distance learning, where through my university I set up a course that's online with packets of things to do, and people do those packets, including some video streaming. When it's time for them to take an exam after they've written their stuff, they stand in front of a video camera and they take a camera to whatever you want it to be, a dance, let them call, and then stream that in, have somebody in the home office look at it and write a critique back and evaluate it for further work. Now that's a much more time-consuming, committed kind of an approach. So again, let me ask How do you like the idea of having it based upon independent skills, 1, 2, 3? Your certificate says, I've attended that session. And by the way, before you leave today, I didn't do this with the women. Shoot. Just make sure that, I've got a piece of paper up here, just make sure that you got your name down so that you can get that certificate. Or, that where you go 1, 2, 3, or the skill base. Now, I've had one response. What are some other responses? You can just holler these out because they're going to be quick responses. We're taping. All right. I thought she'd carry clear across the room.
As a coach, I would be interested in being competency certified. A caller who wants to go through and just kind of hone their own skills may prefer the attendance level certification, but as a coach, I'd be looking for something that's going to say, I know what I'm talking about, or I got no business telling somebody else.
Okay, thanks.
I actually think it needs to be a combination of both. Problem is if a caller can't reproduce what we're asking them to teach, they have no business teaching it. So we really need to have a combination of both. They need to be proficient in replicating the sound themselves, and they need to know exactly how to do the exact things that you said. They have to know how to extend range and how to diagnose at least basic problems. Excuse me, my name's Derek Page.
Back here.
Ron Marcus from Tucson, Arizona. I like the first version you came up with, level 1, 2, 3. But as I think from a caller coach standpoint, something about to add to the level 1, 2, and 3, something about diagnosis of problems rather than just fundamentals. This is how you do it. Being able to look at it or listen to someone in a caller school or on a one-to-one basis and diagnose a problem accurately.
That sort of leads me to another place that I thought might be useful. Now, how do I get you folks so that you feel comfortable doing the kind of stuff that we've just been talking about? How do you get to the point where you can comfortably analyze somebody else's work and feel confident that you've got it right more than you got it wrong? There's only one way that I see to do that, and that is that each one of you, either in a session by yourselves to preserve your own integrity and your own pride, or just ask you to be humbled up and go right in with everybody else and go walking right straight through 1, 2, 3. So over the course of 3 years, you go through the experience so that you have inside your own body those sensations that go along with that kind of sound. And in the process of doing that, you'll see, because we're going to do it here this hour, you'll stand up, we'll all do the thing together, and then one by one you're doing it. And as you're doing it, you're hearing different sounds coming out of different people's voices. And you start to formulate a sound associated with a behavior over a period of time. Now, if you go through that kind of experience for 3 years, or say that you come this year and you miss next year and you come the year afterwards, so in that year that you would return, you'd go back and refresh yourself in level 1 and then go on into level 2. You go through all those 3 certifications, and at that point becomes the real interesting caller school. Because at that point, I think what happens is that we have those 3 things going, and we have a 4th session that is devoted to teaching vocal skills. And the people that are in that class, in that session, are going to be doing quasi-student teaching in all of the other 3 classes. So you come through, you've been all the way through, so you go into the class number 1, and then instead of just me being here, I've got 4 or 5 of you broken up with 4 or 5 people around you as you work on those skills with them, and I pilot around just making sure that the things that you're responding to are accurate with the things that you've been taught. And in that process, it's a quasi-student teaching mode where you get a chance to take what you think you know and teach it to somebody else in a controlled environment till the point that you've been through all 3 of those things. And at that point, I think that you're pretty well grounded in being able to both know how to solve it, how to hear it, and how to diagnose it. The things that I'll be describing to you in all 3 of these levels are very mainstream kind of things. They're not designed to be out on the fringe at all. And there are people in my profession who like to be out on the fringe. They like to take risks with other people's voices. Because if they get it right, the voice can just take off like a rocket and get quantumly better all of a sudden. And there's a great power in that. And the teacher gets recognized as being insightful and being able to help people to solve those problems. unfortunately, for out on the fringe, doesn't matter if it's on this fringe or that fringe, this one or this one, it doesn't really matter where they are. Their success rate is about equal to their failure rate. For every one that they really connect with, for somebody else they don't connect and they create trouble for the person. Whereas the person that's in the middle of the road doesn't really get out on the fringe too far and therefore may miss some of those really exciting insights but avoids the risk of doing some real damage to people. And for people that are just sort of getting their feet wet with that, staying right down the middle of the road seems to me the most healthy for yourselves and also the most healthy for the people that you're going to instruct. So does that sound like a plan? Because John mentioned that the curriculum wasn't worked out. Well, it's in my head all worked out. It's just that he hasn't agreed to it. and after John and I get of one mind, then we got to get Deborah on board. And after we get the two of them on board, then we got to get the board of directors to buy in. So it's real clear in my mind. It's just not done in everybody else's mind.
Daryl Clendenin, is it realistic to think that we could possibly get to a point of being able to do some of what you do really in the short sessions that are involved here at CALLERLAB? Sounds like a yes.
The answer to that is yes. As a matter of fact, by the time you leave here today, you'll already have some notions in your mind about how to diagnose a particular problem, about how to make sound. It'll be a preliminary. I've spent 25 or 30 years developing my ears to do this, and you'll do it. You won't have as much experience as I will. I've also made this my life's work, and for you, the singing part of it is a kind of a tangent, not the center of your lives. So you'd expect that I'd have more information than you would have. I have more experience than you would have, and therefore my diagnosis is probably going to be more on the mark and get there quicker than you will. All of that having been said, so what? So what? A person who needs correction, do they go better with no correction or a little correction? I think anybody can benefit as long as the information is handled sensibly and sanely. You can respond by saying, I hear this in your voice, and this is an approach that has worked for other people in the past. That isn't saying to them, this is the one and only way to do it. This is just a potential solution to a problem that you perceive. And almost always, if you diagnose it properly, you say, I hear this in your voice. The person will say, yeah, I know. I've known that all this time, and I just don't know what to do about it. In other words, as soon as you tell the truth, people have a tendency to respond to the truth with appreciation. They want to get better. Occasionally, they'll be defensive, but most of the time, they just want good information to help them along the way. Haven't you found that to be true of most of the callers you've been working with? People want to get better. That's the reason they spend the money to come. And so it's not like you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. Credibility, that'll come with time. You get some success, you'll start to become credible. But it has more to do with the hearing of the problem correctly than it does any other thing. There comes a point in time where you say, that's as far as my knowledge extends, and the integrity that you have in your own professional attitudes will say, I have some information, I just don't have all information. I can solve these kinds of problems. I've tried all the things that I know how to do, and they're not solving your problem. Now you go to a voice coach to solve that problem. That's a little bit more deep-seated, or it's a little bit more masked, and I can't quite tell what's the right answer.
John Kaltenthaler, at what point do we as caller coaches recognize a problem, start to work with it, and then know that we have to stop before we do damage? How do we recognize that point, or is there an easy way to do that?
Usually you find where the line is by crossing it too many times. You walk across that line, and then you see the consequences of the choice you've made, and you think, gee, I wish I hadn't done that, and then you learn that you don't do that anymore. And the question is that dangerous? The human body is an amazingly resilient thing. The human mind, in some respects, is less resilient than the body is. The mind can get fixed on rights and wrongs and taboos, meaning, I just can't do that. I don't know why. I'll be in trouble. My mommy will be mad at me if I cross that line. there are these kind of barriers that we put up in our minds. Sometimes those barriers are because we've had a very forceful teacher who's made things black and white, and we're susceptible, and way back when we were young, we bought into it, and we just never revisited that particular thing, and so we still have a kind of a childlike mentality about certain behaviors that we just can't bring ourselves to do. And then you do them, you cross the line, you think, oh, that wasn't that hard. Actually, I kind of like being on the other side of that line. And that then is no longer a taboo. That's a place that you've chosen to go. On the other hand, you cross that line and you say, ew, this doesn't feel very good. I'm going to go back over on this side, and then that's no longer a taboo. That's a line that you know where it is, and you know what it feels like to be on the other side of it, and you don't go there because you have had experience. And so, in a sense, I don't think that you're going to be doing bad things to a person. Unfortunately, some of those things that make a voice just take off like a skyrocket, and just from one moment to the next, it just miraculously changed. Often, those are the things, those massive success moments are also, they carry in them the seeds of the greatest destruction. Because people in their own minds have a tendency to say that if a little bit is good, then more of the same thing is better. And so on their own, they just exaggerate, and it's in the exaggeration that the trouble occurs. So along in your teaching, you'll learn along the way to say, don't exaggerate, just do it, and let it grow up a little bit at a time. Don't make it grow up from today till tomorrow. So there are some limits, and where those limits lie for each one of you will be very much dependent upon your own personality. How cautious you are by nature, how optimistic you are by nature, how assertive you are by nature, how reticent you are by nature. Those will be all part of the whole package. Having said that, shall we just go ahead with level 1? Should we jump right on into that thing then? Good. Would you all please stand up? The first thing that needs to go up as part of the whole conversation of singing is how to make healthy sound. Those of you that are sitting in the back, why don't you get those of you that are tucked back there, come on over here where you can see, so you're a little closer to the front. Eventually, I'm going to have you out of your chairs and in a semicircle here, or an oval, where you can see and sense everybody's work. As a matter of fact, let's do that right now before we get even started. And any of you that find yourselves unable to stand for the duration, feel free to excuse yourselves and sit down from time to time until you feel comfortable to come back up. Let's just make an elongated oval here in the circle. The first thing that needs to happen is that you need to find good posture, good singing posture. We're a little crowded here. We got some space over here by the table. Come on over and let's just come on around. So the right kind of posture that you need to know about is that which we were designed to walk with. And that is where the weight of our head is gravitationally balanced on our shoulders, and the weight of our shoulders and our upper torso is gravitationally balanced on our hips, and those are grounded into the ground on our feet. The right way to say that is that your ears should line up across your shoulders, right? And almost nobody does. Is there anybody who's I need two people to be an example. Just, here's one, and come on. Okay, so what I'm going to get you to do is to stand this way so that the people looking across can see that. And then I'll get you over here. Would you come over here? And I'll get you to stand right here, like so that the people that stand this way can see. All right? Okay, so that's Derek and Ron. All right. Now, as you look, we're going to start with Ron, and you'll notice here's Ron's shoulders, his shoulder points, and his ears are about 2 inches in front of where they're supposed to be. That means this big melon of his head has been carried for years forward of the gravitational axis, which probably means that, right through here, he's got some strong muscles in his shoulders that have been used to holding that in a forward position. And, you know, you've stood like that your whole life as far as you know, so it feels pretty comfortable. When I get you in the place that you're supposed to be, you're not going to like it at all. Okay, so now we'll come over here and take a look. Here's the shoulders. Here are the ears, about an inch difference. So how can you two gentlemen bring yourselves to where your ears are over your shoulders? That's one possible answer. Yeah, and in the process, yeah, shoulders forward, head back.
No, I don't think so.
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard, isn't it? Because you're accustomed to where you are. I'm going to start right over here, Ron. First thing I'm going to ask Ron to do, and you can do this with yourselves while you're at it. Reach to the back of your head, and right at the base of your skull, you'll find a kind of a bony promontory. Yours isn't very big, Ron. It's right there. It's a place in Utah where the two chains, it's a little bony bump. A little bump. Okay, right there. And then take your little finger and put it there on that spot. And take your thumb or your first finger and reach down and find the top vertebrae of your spine, the thoracic vertebrae. Most people have a kind of a prominent vertebrae right at the top of their back, below their neck. Take those 2 points and stretch them as far apart as you can comfortably. And in the process of doing that, everybody's now looking at the floor because the angle is different than what you're used to. Now I'm going to do something with Ron. Just watch how it's done. I'm going to put my hand at the back of Ron's neck. Drop your hand for a second, Ron. Without using your neck muscles, push back against my hand. You're getting there, except that Ron's choosing to sway his back. Oh, there you started to do it. Now you're starting to use your neck muscles. Now watch me. Ron, you do that for me. The same thing that I was just doing for you. Here I am. I'm collapsed. My head is forward. My ears are forward. I stretch my neck long. Now I'm going to go to stand up. Now just give me a little bit of resistance, just a little bit. And you'll see that as I push back, I'm not shortening my neck. I'm not doing that. I'm not shortening my neck muscles. I'm stretching backwards. And now my ears are over my shoulders. And how did I get there? What changed? No, not at all. I did. But it wasn't my head that I went back. What I did was that there are some muscles on each one of the cervical vertebrae. These vertebrae in your neck, they're called the scalene muscles. And they go from that vertebrae, and they go forward underneath inside your body, and they attach the inside of your first and your second ribs, so that when the cervical vertebrae gets drawn back, the upper part of the chest gets raised. So the answer is, do you see how I got there? I actually changed my posture. I changed the position of my chest to get myself there. You want to try that? Okay. So Derek, he stretched it long. Now he pushes, push back. Don't shorten your neck. Just keep pushing. Stretch. No. Keep coming. There you go. Now you're using the right muscles. A little more.
I'm not used to having my chest that high.
This works really good for ladies. Yeah, and there you are. Now, if I let go, his first reaction is, I'm going to fall over backwards. He doesn't turn out to fall over backwards. Now he's lined up, and he feels like Frankenstein. Just as stiff as he can be. And the reality is that this kind of posture has to be worked into. You have to allow yourself time to grow into it. So my advice to you is that you only adopt this posture when you're practicing singing or when you're actually singing. But I know enough about you guys that when you get singing, you won't think about this. And besides that, you sing for 3 hours, and if you were to hold this posture for 3 hours, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed the next morning because it tugs on some muscles right below your shoulder blades. They're the muscles that are really responsible for posture. And none of us are strong in those areas because we're not used to lifting heavy objects. We're used to standing erect. We're all sitting in ergonomic chairs, and we slouch in them anyway. And before long, those muscles don't have any meaning. Now, each one of you needs to find that position. So there are several ways you can do it. Just stretch your neck long, and then just put a little bit of resistance behind your neck, and just draw back against that resistance. You'll feel the drawing of the muscles just below your shoulder blades in your back until you're in that position. Another way you can do that is to find a wall. This has a chair rail around it, so it's not great, but this wall is pretty good. If you want to, just come over and back up against that wall, and you get your heels touching, your rear end touching, your shoulders touching, and the back of your neck. And if you've got a big rear end, then you're the worse off for it. Just find yourself. Now, you get in that position, and Now, I'm sorry, give me your name, please.
Gary.
Okay, Gary. Gary is not used to this. I saw him starting to reach back for the wall. There are about 4 inches, 3.5 inches between the wall and where Gary's head is. So, Gary, what are you going to have to do to get your head back there? His first attempt was to just sort of tick his head back. Now, stretch. Now, keep coming back toward the wall. Keep coming. Now, you can feel that tug in the low part of your back, can't you? It's a big deal. Ron, that's right. It's right here right above the small of your back. And if you can get there, then you can find that kind of posture. Why is all of this important? Why go through the pain and suffering? There are 2 good reasons. One of them is that it takes all of the weighty bones of your body, of the thorax, your rib cage, the sternum, and it elevates those things in a naturalistic way so that they're no longer weighted down on your lungs. Can you see how that would be an advantage? You can definitely see that if your lungs have to expand and lift a heavy object to boot, they're not going to be as efficient as they would otherwise be. The second part of the thing is that when you get yourself stretched into that kind of position, the trachea, which goes down and connects to your lungs, is sitting in an entirely vertical position. There are muscles that attach from the inside of your skull, behind your ears, down to the top of your trachea, to the top of your larynx. And when you stand in a collapsed position, those muscles are slack and the trachea, the larynx, flops forward slightly on the throat. And therefore, when you go to sing, you've got a little crimp in your vocal production. When you stand up tall, that larynx is sitting right on top of the trachea. The sound comes out, doesn't have to turn a corner. It just goes through the vocal folds, and the sound is that much easier to produce. And when you have collapsed posture, then you have a problem with the collapse. Now, you tell me, having experienced this, what do you learn from this kind of an experience? This is posture. This is singer's posture. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the Metropolitan Opera stage or whether you're on the stage of Broadway or whether you're on the platform at a square dance. What is singer's posture? What does it feel like? How can you identify it and help somebody else to find it? Anybody want to volunteer anything?
One of the things years ago my voice teachers would tell me is to picture that you have the top of your skull, the very top of your skull has a string to it, and pull that string straight up. And that's one of the things that I tell people. The other thing I tell them is it's like a water hose. If you kink that water hose, you're not going to get as much water out of that hose. You're also not going to get as much air out. It's also going to irritate the throat, cause problems.
Both of those observations are really useful.
I have a whole visualization that I use that starts out, Derek Page. It starts out with the feet. You pretend that you're an evergreen tree. Establish a good trunk on the floor, and then establish the spine as if it were a continuation of the trunk, the ribs as if they were the branches flowing weightlessly, etc., to the top of the head, which should stand like the star on top of the tree, perfectly balanced, weightless.
That's also a very good visualization. How, as you are watching yourself do this and sensing it from other people, how can you assist people to get there? Well, here's one of the ways. We can't do it right now, but as you leave here, I'm going to give you a competency-based assignment. You're all going to find your posture, and then you're going to go out from here, you're going to go around the corner and out at least 100 yards and then walk back in this posture. And when you start off, you're going to feel just like Frankenstein, all stiff and rigid. And hopefully by the end, you'll have found the natural rhythm. And almost always, when I do this with my pupils, after walking not even 50 yards, they start to say, "Oh, this feels so good. My head doesn't hurt. I feel like I'm floating. I feel like I'm taller. I feel like I'm more knowledgeable. I feel like I'm more beautiful. I feel like I'm more arrogant than I ever was before." And part of it has to do with this sense of elongation of the spine. Almost everybody feels at least an inch taller than they really are because we stand in a kind of a collapsed position. It has a very, very big bearing upon the way that we sing. Did you have a comment to make? No, just experimenting. Yeah. Now, while I'm here beside Scott, Scott has this dilemma. It's not easy for him to reach the back wall. And so his solution was to just sort of tip his head back until he could reach the wall.
Right.
And the right thing is to keep his neck stretched long in the process. If doing this standing up is hard, you can do it laying on the floor. And inevitably, you'll feel, all of you already have felt the stretch of the muscles that have not been used in some cases for many, many years. And so therefore, you have to be very careful to only use this in small increments and allow those muscles to get used to this kind of new posture. And over a period of 4 to 6 months, going into this place, maybe 20 minutes at one time. Eventually you get to where it's an hour, then it's an hour and a half, then it's an hour and a half 3 times a day. And before long, of your own free will and choice, you'll adopt this posture because this is ultimately much, much more comfortable to you. And you won't find yourself with lower back problems as much, and hip aches, and strain in your neck, the shoulder. Those of you that have trouble with your shoulders, those muscles are the way they are because they're trying to hold something out of gravitational balance. But initially, you won't like it. Here's the question.
Daryl Clendenin, this might be an initially type of thing, but standing that way, it does tend to pull my chest up. You say that takes the pressure off from the support. Okay. But it also makes it very difficult for me to get what I would consider an adequate breath for singing.
That's a question of perception than it is actual reality. Let's go progressing right from, let's not leave today before we come back to that, okay, Daryl? But if you'll allow me, I want to jump to another topic. Now let's come and get ourselves in the semicircle at ease. Thank you. Okay. As you're coming into this position, the next thing that needs to be done is to discover the issue of the Bernoulli effect. Some of you have been introduced to that before. If you've heard me talk, you have some introduction to it. I need somebody. Could you be the person to hold the microphone for me while I have both my hands free? Sure. Just hold it out here where I can hold it where I can. Yeah, the Bernoulli effect is a law of aerodynamics that just simply says that air in motion creates low pressure. Low pressure creates suction. So that it's the same, it's the rule that allows our weather systems to, the reason we have wind is because of the imbalance between high and low pressure. The wind blowing creates low pressure, so on and so forth. It's what makes airplanes fly. It's also one of the tools that helps us sing. As air comes forward out of our lungs, up through the trachea, passing toward the vocal folds, they are drawn, the airstream is narrowed right as it approaches the vocal folds by some membranes that are right beneath the vocal folds called the conus elasticus. The airstream is narrowed, and as it narrows, the molecules of air have more molecules per square inch than before, and so there's more pressure, and therefore they speed up to move through this constricted area. It is the velocity of those molecules that creates the suction. And so as they pass through, and the vocal folds, which are no longer at rest but nearly ready to sing, they've been drawn to the preparation for speaking. As the air passes through those, then the suction is enough at some point to draw them into a full closed position. You'll see this here demonstrated by these pieces of paper. By the way, each one of you needs to get a couple of pieces of paper and experiment with this, because the visualization is very powerful when you teach it to other people. And I've had lots of students who said, I can do that, and then they can't do that. And you have to figure out how this happens. But if you didn't know anything about the Bernoulli principle, and I held 2 pieces of paper vertically like this, and blew between them, your immediate assumption was that the air would blow them further apart. But the actual fact is just the reverse. Watch. They are drawn together rather than blown apart, and they're drawn together because of the low pressure caused by the movement of air. Now here's a little bit more velocity. Add a little more velocity. And that's what you want your vocal folds to do. You want them to vibrate, just like these 2 pieces of paper did. Why did they vibrate? They vibrated because they were drawn together until they collided with each other. At the moment that they collided with each other, the air molecules that sought to pass between them were blocked for a split second. The air molecules started to stack up on themselves until there was sufficient pressure to blow the two pieces of paper apart. And as they blew apart, immediately low pressure reoccurred and they were drawn back together. So the whole process of making sound is basically passive. Once you get the breath going, you set up the conditions and then you let your voice happen. You don't make your voice happen. That's a fundamental shift in paradigm for most people who have spent their lives making their voice happen. You can sense this. Thank you very much. You can sense this, each one of you, by parting your lips at about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. Okay? Don't do anything with it except now just blow between them. Now, increase the breath speed. You all know, because you set up the experiment, you all know that your lips started out parted. And then I raised the question to you, if they started out parted, why did they close? Why did they start to flap? And the answer to that is the Bernoulli effect. The Bernoulli effect is that thing which draws them to closure. Once they're closed, the pressure builds, the pressure forces them apart, the air moves, low pressure occurs, they're drawn back together, and this can happen hundreds, even thousands of times a second, depending upon the pitch that's being sought. And that is one of the things that makes pitch happen. It's the number of vibrations per second. Okay, so once again, let me just demonstrate. There are two elements to this. That point at which my lips start to vibrate, that is the energy threshold, or the threshold at which my lips start to vibrate. And so you'll hear me say again and again, breath threshold singing. And that is that point at which the velocity of the breath is enough to trigger the vocal folds into spontaneous combustion, spontaneous vibration, without you having to make them do it. Here's an example now. Mostly gentlemen in this room now, you gentlemen, your lips are 2 inches apart, 2.5 inches across. They're about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch thick. There's a fairly significant amount of flesh there. And it took a certain velocity to get enough suction to move those pieces of flesh and cause them to flap in the breeze. Your vocal folds are much skinnier. They are about the length of my thumbnail. They're about 7 to 9 centimeters long, and they are thin. And so it doesn't take as much breath to make them work. However, there's an important principle. Did any of you have trouble getting your lips to flap? Those people have two challenges facing them. One is to get the breath going enough. The second one is to keep their lips relaxed enough so that they can actually breathe. They can flap. And if your lips, now tell me your name again. Gary has, you'll notice that when Gary does it, he makes an embouchure that's kind of tight. And if you just leave them kind of make a motorboat sound. Yet you notice that in order to do that, you had to relax your lips. And so that same principle applies to your vocal cords as well. If your vocal folds are inclined to be stiff and tense, it will take more breath to activate them than if they are relaxed and at ease. Now, everybody's going to get a chance to make an independent sound in here today, and that will automatically ensure that their vocal folds are not at relaxed and relieved. But that's still going to be the way it happens, because each one of you has to hear the variety, and there are as many different balanced varieties as there are people in this room. So you need to hear it again and again and again before you can really identify it. Simultaneously, you need to feel it again and again and again inside your body. And here's the routine that I'd like to suggest for you. This is just one of several routines that could be used to teach hitting this breath threshold singing. You start off with a whispering on pitch. And you can feel the sensations in your throat. You can feel the air leaking through. It's very passive. It's very mild. There's no constriction. There's no pressure associated at all. Now, take your fingers in front of you. Imagine that you have a candle burning on the tip of your finger at 2 inches. Blow it out. Blow it out. No, just blow. Now at 4 inches. At 6 inches. 8. 12. You have to blow harder. You have to intensify the stream of your breath in order for the breath to travel that extra distance. That doesn't have to change. A really wonderful device is to go, if you're ever going to be teaching this principle, go out and buy a child's a pinwheel at Toys R Us or someplace like that. And just hold the pinwheel and just say, blow. Hey, just try it. Imagine you have a pinwheel on the tip of your finger. Make it blow slow. Now make it go fast. So when I say to you, intensify your breath, you now know what that means, don't you? Okay? So you keep the sighing position. Go again, sigh. Without changing anything in your throat. The next time you start, intensify your breath. Hear the change? Collectively, hear the change? It's much, much more sound, much less breath escaping, but it's still not threshold. Here you go again. Intensify yet again. Now something starts to happen. It isn't just a clear sound with no breath leaking. Now there's beginning to be a richness in the sound as well. Here you go. One more. Intensify one more time. And at that point, if you did what I instructed you to do, you would have felt a relaxation in your throat, an enormous amount of acoustical energy vibrating in a variety of spots in your body, and more activity in your stomach than you're used to having, maybe by 3 or 4 times. Am I correct about that? You're using way more breath than you normally would assume that you could. That's only one note. Now, here's our moment. We're going to go around the circle. Each one of you, I want you to try to find that threshold. Not because you're on trial. It's just that you need to find it and others need to hear it. Okay? So just on that, just a single note. Again. This is a moment. Oh, this gives me an instructive moment. You are Paul. Paul Hense just was the one that demonstrated. Paul is used to having tight vocal folds. And so for him, that may have felt relaxed. But to me, it sounded like there was too much of a pressing sound in there. And it sounds, and this is another byproduct of not being on threshold. Either you will have a breathy, airy sound, or there are some individuals who would say, I'm not going to tolerate a breathy sound, so I'm going to tighten up my vocal folds to make do with the little amount of breath that I've got. Have you ever blown up a balloon, and as you release the balloon and pinch the neck, it goes squeak, and it's actually a very sweet little tone until the balloon is nearly empty. And then, at that point, when there isn't very much air flowing through, you have to pull on the neck of the balloon tighter, and it moves from squeak, and it starts to strain. And that's the issue that's at hand. So I'm going to come back. Paul, would you whisper that on pitch? That feels very gentle in your throat, does it not? Okay, now in that context, I want you to imagine that you're going to make the pinwheel go fast through a relaxed throat. Now, you haven't hit the threshold yet. Not yet. Now, don't press your throat. Make the air move. That's there, and you backed away. Good. Now, here it is out here. Make it move. Intensify one more time. Twice more. Okay. Along the way, you sort of hit a limit that behaves a little bit like a taboo that says, I'm not going to go that loud. And there are some people who were raised in a home where children were seen and not heard. Where you happen to have been raised in a home like that? No, that doesn't account for it? Okay.
I'm noticing 2 things. First thing, you're allowing him, name Derek Page, sorry about that. First thing, you're allowing him to keep his hands behind his back, which from what I have been told locks off all the muscles from here from being allowed to expand at all, which would account for some of the breathy sound that you were getting from him.
I don't agree with that entirely. Let me explain why. The first thing that you said about the hands behind the back, there's a truth there. The second part of the thing that you said was that there are some muscles back here that need to expand. There are no muscles in your back. There are no muscles in your back that expand. Zero. There are no muscles. Only muscles contract. They only get smaller. It's just a physiological reality. But there is a sensation with many singers that something in the lower back expands. And that has to do with where your diaphragm is, and we haven't gotten there yet. But the third thing is, and this is where I was disagreeing over here with Eric, was that those were the reasons why he hadn't hit the threshold. The reason that he hadn't hit the threshold is because he wasn't letting his air go enough. Comment, question.
I'm Lona. Do you have another word for threshold? Because I don't understand that word.
That is a very awkward word, isn't it? It's the word threshold is that thing where when you pass from one place to another. It's the portal of the door, whereas before you hit that portal or that threshold, you're on one side, and then as you go through, you're on the other side. And that's what that word means. It means that in our language, both in reference to the door, but it also is reference to when a pain gets so great that you can't stand it anymore. That's the threshold at which you can't handle it anymore. What word would you use to describe it in your English?
In my English, the limit.
The limit. Okay. Okay, so limit is, that's actually, I was down in Brazil doing this, and they kept saying threshold. What's the threshold? And they ended up with the same explanation. It's the limit. It's the point at which the breath becomes effective. So, one more time. First lead. Whisper. Now intensify your breath. That's coming. Now new breath. It's now clear. There's no breath. I keep waiting for it to sort of spring into full life. There, just whispered at me, just went peek, and then it went away. Come on. Thank you. But not here. And as you did that, if you did that correctly, Paul, you didn't feel an increase of pressure or tension in your throat. You just got more sound. Okay, so now you watch that process, how I continued to play around and not let Paul off the hook until he hit that point. He's going to have another opportunity in just a minute. Are you on threshold or no?
No.
This is norm. If you're not on threshold, how are you going to solve that problem?
More air.
Okay, already that's better, but there's another answer that Norm could have given, and that is I can relax my vocal folds more. I can go more toward that whispering sensation. And the two of those things will probably get you the right answer. Good. There came a point where he started to push his breath. Could you hear it? It started to diffuse. He went, that isn't what you want. There's a situation of trying to make it happen instead of letting it happen. So you set up the conditions and you just move air through it. Yeah, that came very close. Now here's the pinwheel out here. Go. Good. Thank you. Good. Was there anything that you didn't like about that? Did you hit the threshold in your estimation? In your estimation? Yeah. Close. How would you change it? Don't have to say it, just do it. Did you feel anything crimp down in your throat? Yes. Don't go there. Keep passive here. Now, he did it. This is Bill. And Bill did that, but that was emotionally, on an emotional level, kind of scary to do. Because many of us feel like we need to control our voices, and we do it by keeping control right here at the vocal valve. We keep a certain tightness. We can monitor. We can feel what pitch we're on. We can feel how loud we are by how much tension we've accumulated. And the truth is, you have to let go of that, or you can't go here.
Just to make sure that I understand exactly what you're trying to explain here, and there's a difference between releasing the sound versus producing the sound?
That's a very good way to say it. That's right. Okay, so can you release the sound rather than producing it? He's been a producer all of his life. This is asking the impossible. That's right. And there was something that happened there that he would have been able to identify. Did that feel different than what you did the time before? I could tell. I start from the axiom, and you can trust this axiom, that when it sounds different, it is different. It's real easy. If it sounds different, it is different. Then you go back to the person and say, what did you do to make that happen? And try to help them identify what it was that they did so that they can repeat it and imitate themselves. Did you hit threshold? What would be your guess? And how could you tell? that I could hear breath leaking. The tone wasn't completely pure. Okay, now stop and intensify your breath. Now the pitch started to wander a little bit, and I'm not worried about that right now. I'm just interested in getting the breath moving. Now time out. How about if you go right about there? There you go. So part of your problem was that you were too low in your range. Okay. The trick is you have to be able to do this in all parts of your range, not just in one particular pitch. That's the dilemma with what we're doing right now.
Don Beck. Arden, I still have a question what you mean by threshold. I know what the word means, and to me it's a transitioning from one state to another, but I'm not sure what state we're trying to transition to.
We're trying to transition to a state where the sound is being generated with the least amount of physical activity possible, particularly least amount of muscular activity here in the throat. Most singers feel constriction in their throat, and as they climb higher in the scale, that constriction gets more exaggerated, and that begins to be a limit for almost everybody. But if you can teach your vocal folds passivity and vibration, then the movement into the high range and into the low range, the loud range and the soft range, all of a sudden becomes quite easy to accomplish. So there is the interrelationship between how much air is flowing and how much resistance there is in the throat. And when those come into equilibrium, you achieve that state that I'm calling threshold. Okay? Now go higher. Now there's still part of you that's trying to make it happen. So let it first whisper. See how hard it was to let go? Now with that position in your throat, add breath. That moved from a place where it was a clean, but a kind of a clear, narrow tone to where it started to take on some extra color to it. Did you sense that? Could you describe it?
More relaxed.
Did you catch that? More sound, more relaxed. That's an important issue. Okay.
I'm going to whisper.
Increase the breath stream. Intensify your breath. Now you're pushing, and you're pushing against something that's getting progressively tighter. Here's another way. This methodology that I've used thus far can work. You do this for me. You just pant. Everybody try this. It doesn't have to be that noisy. That means you're just using what's called tidal breath, the very littlest amount of breath. And if you set that in motion, watch how I do this. I have to get my vocal folds have to make an adjustment to make do with the amount of breath that's there, and there can be no pressure on it because you're too flexible. So try that. No, you got to inhale along the way. So pant first. Are you going in and out?
Yeah.
Okay, now keep doing that while you're making sound.
Like that?
That's right.
Yes, I know.
But you notice what he's doing with his body. This is not a pant. This is not a pant. This is a compression that says I'm used to driving through an obstacle. So I'm asking you to simplify. Now raise it up to the pitch. Almost. Come on. And now open your mouth into a real sound. Now notice the sound that he's making. It's still not a pant. You're not taking any new breath. It's a sense of which is a compression rather than equilibrium. Slow. Match my pitch. Now you notice that when that starts, there's no percussion on it, and there's no percussion when you release. That's a step on the right track, but still below threshold. And in this case, in Ron's case, 3 minutes, 30. Okay, I was going to say.
30 minutes ago, yeah.
No, as we get to Ron's primary challenge, and this is also true over here, is that there is a tendency to have so much compression here by years of habit that it's hard to let go of it. And so it takes an enormous amount of breath to get them to work, and they've gotten used to that over the years. Would you guys really want to change that? Maybe. Maybe not. It's not like you've been a failure at it.
I'm not so sure that that would apply after I'm warmed up.
Yeah.
In the act of work.
Sure. Okay, John. Good. Start with this side. Now increase it. How do you feel in your throat? Any compression, or does it feel loose? Good. You've had some voice training, haven't you? He's got his mind gravitated on some other things that don't have to do with the basic sound production. He's tuning inside of his resonators, and that's not wrong. I don't want to take that away from you, but that's not the solution to the problem that you're looking at. Could you hear that even though that was a somewhat rounded tone, in the center of it, there was still some breath leaking, so he hadn't really hit threshold. How does that feel different?
It felt like I went over the point. Yeah,
you did. Good. I'm asking for something more specific, so that as you're listening, you can hear what you hear and you can get response. It feels fill in the blank. So try again.
No.
Hey, I'm going to explain. Try again to explain. He said, I got over the threshold.
Actually, what I did was I wasn't really relaxed in my jaw and my upper body the first time, and second time I let go.
Okay. That's what you did. What did it feel like? He's not giving the right answers to help you guys.
Help me relax. Yeah, Derek, help me out.
No, the reality is that what happened is that he hit that threshold, and immediately there was a core that came into the center of it. You all heard it. Before, it was a nice sort of warm but cotton candy-like sound that was diffused a little bit. Then it got a core in the middle of it, and he would have felt it because there would have been an increase in intensity of vibrations all the way through his chest and up into the bones of his face. That was unlike the other sensation. The other one was there in all of those places, but in a pastel shade, and this started to take on a primary color. It was more intense. See, didn't I say that good?
Yeah.
This is what he meant to say all along.
Scott Byers. One of the other things I noticed that when there's the relaxation occurs, a more natural vibrato also comes out.
Vibrato is a natural byproduct of good, intense singing. And the less intensely you sing, the less you'll have vibrato. And the more intensely you sing, the more vibrato will be present. And so as this breath energy starts to increase, it just triggers that into natural being. I'm going to step up the pace a little bit. You've seen the process of trying to watch people through, and I've got several other tasks that I want to try to accomplish. You got to do it earlier today. Can I bypass you? Okay, now that's not bad. That's a good tone. Did you hit threshold?
I don't know.
You tell me, from your perspective.
Probably close.
Yes, but if did you go above, or were you below? Or were you right on?
I'll say right on.
Okay, I'll say just a little below.
Okay. You're probably right.
And it was a nice tone, but much in the same way that Vandy just did. It was a nice tone that didn't have a core in the middle of it, and so I knew that there was something not quite right about it. So start with that whispering feeling. At one point, he was going right on, and then he stiffened his vocal folds, and then he started to push against them, and it took on an edge or a stridency to it. That will be a very common occurrence. So instead of doing it all at once, just do it in increments. So here's sigh. Now stop. Now come with more intensity. Already more sound, but still released. That's what I'm looking for. One more time. And there you have basically the same sound that was there before, but it's more solid. It's not quite as opaque. Good, Doc. Can I get you to stand up? Get some. Thank you. Start with whisper. Good. Thank interesting. You started up. You got a really nice voice, but could you find yourself wanting to control it? He was doing a ton of monitoring. Who wasn't? Tell the truth. Maintain the release. Now intensify your breath. That's on the right track. Now one more time. Good. My apologies to each of you that I didn't get to independently. We're now going to go to the next task, and I'll come back around this direction. Would you all sing for me? My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Okay? So starting on about this pitch. But the question is, can you do that on breath threshold? Can you hit that limit right off the bat for every single note? And you'll discover that the sensations of threshold or limit are the same regardless of whether you're high or low. You will feel sensations that are warming down into the body, spreading up into the head, and very vibrant here in the throat, but with no tenseness. And that will remain true in the low range and the high range and the range in the middle. However, that doesn't mean that the amount of air that you use is absolutely constant all the time. You just actually have to stand back and say to yourself, that's threshold. Now, body, give me threshold on every note. My body. Hang on just a second. Hang on a second. I'm going to just demonstrate. So that it is my. Okay, I know what that feels like intuitively. I can kinesthetically feel that. And I want that on every note. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. And I can feel my body making just ever so subtle, minute adjustments that otherwise I might not have made if I were trying to control it consciously. So it's quite the reverse of making it happen. It's setting up the conditions, giving the commands, and then standing back and watching it unfold. Join me, would you please? Go. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Now the next phrase, I heard this. Basically very good, except for my Bonnie lies. All of a sudden that high note caused everybody, or some buddies, to go, ah! And all of a sudden threshold went away and was replaced by the tension of anxiety. Second phrase, go. My Bonnie lies over the sea. You get a third try. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me. Now talk just a little bit about what that felt like.
It reminded me I haven't sung much lately and I ran out of breath.
That I didn't. I'm surprised to hear you say that. But what else did you sense?
The going up the first time, it did feel comfortable and relaxed that I probably wouldn't have before.
The vibrations as you move up into the upper middle part of your voice and are on threshold are distinctive from anything that you felt before if you haven't ever done this before. So I want you to go again. We'll go on, bring back, bring back. We'll go to the chorus now. And bring back, oh, bring back my Bonnie to me, to me. Bring back, oh, bring back my Bonnie to me. Okay, Jeanette. My Bonnie lies over.
My Bonnie.
No, my pitch.
That's the point. That's the point.
My
Bonnie lies over the ocean.
That's close. Do it one more time.
My Bonnie lies over the sea.
Good.
And the words are?
My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the ocean.
Same pitch?
Yeah.
That's the problem. Give me the
My Bonnie lies.
My Bonnie lies over the ocean.
Actually, that was pretty good. But you stay below threshold at some times. How could you tell? I'm sorry, say again? Slightly pinched, and that slightly pinched tendency is a person who has gotten used to getting along with insufficient breath flow. So it's also the evidence of a person who likes to control things.
Okay.
So, just that sighing feeling in your throat.
Same line? What was it?
Same phrase.
My body? My body. Whoops. Higher. My. There?
That's it.
My bunny lies over the ocean.
When my bunny lies over the sea.
My bunny lies over the sea.
That's right. No, that's all right. I'm interested in bond.
In bond.
My bond.
Okay.
Can you keep that on threshold as well?
I don't know.
On limit?
My bunny lies over.
She hit it, but it hit her back.
My bunny lies over the sea.
Thank you. Okay. Pick up right where she left off. This is Ed.
My bunny lies over the ocean.
Good. Martin.
My bunny lies over the ocean.
On threshold? Well, I'm getting mixed answers. On threshold? It's either yes or no. The answer is no.
I didn't hit.
There's many good things about it, but it's not on threshold. Why? Because there is breath leaking through. Yeah, the tone isn't clear.
My bunny lies over the ocean.
Now, how about the very first note? You notice that once he got up to bunny lies, he was fine, but the first note wasn't.
The start was not there.
No, but you know how to solve it.
No.
My bun. No.
That's not it.
My.
Get the breath going so that you hit that threshold.
My bunny lies over the ocean.
Give another try.
My bunny.
Right.
My.
Start as a whisper.
My.
Now intensify that.
My.
One more time.
My. My bunny lies over the ocean.
Okay, go ahead, Dawn.
My bunny lies over the sea.
John.
My bunny lies over the ocean.
That presented a challenge for you, didn't it, Deborah?
Well, yes, it was my line.
The thing that's hard for Debbie is that it's Deborah, sorry. The hard thing for it is to be called Debbie.
Well, you're on the list.
No, the issue. But the interesting thing about what Deborah did there was that she's used to being more energetic and just stripping it down to the point where it's just the raw sound, caused her to have to shift gears downward a little bit, and it did very well. John.
Oh, bring back my bunny to me.
On threshold?
No.
Why not?
Scared.
Yeah, but where? No, it isn't. It's real good for you. Even though you sing like Johnny Cash, it doesn't matter. He can sing high too. Sang high too. Now he sings higher than he ever used to.
I can sing first line, but.
Yeah. Okay. So no, take that same phrase because you were on threshold in every place except for one note.
Oh, bring back my bunny to me.
Which note is not on threshold? Bring back is the one.
Bring back my bunny to me.
You can get it. It gets kind of stuck in your throat.
Yeah.
So when you get to back, try to maintain that same release, and then just say to your body, "I want it to stay released, and I want that note." Now figure out how to do it. And if it doesn't do it, you take your technique by the throat and you say, "Look, I've given you the best years of my life. You give me that note, or I'm going to change you in for a new technique." And the technique will, instead of saying, "Oh, practice harder, you'll get it," we'll say, "Oh, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir," and then below it, before you know it, you're singing the note. Yeah.
Bring back my. Does that I hit it then?
Yeah.
Bring back my bunny to me.
You always hit the note. There was no problem hitting the note at all. It was what happens when you hit the note. It just got a little edge to it. You want to be able to get to bring, which is natural, back which is natural. Bring back. Hear me press into that top note.
Bring back my Bonnie to me.
Bravo. You want to change songs? Sure. Okay, 2. Oh, America. Give me a home. Mary had a little lamb. Amazing. Amazing grace. Amazing grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
That represented a challenge for you. You did very well with it. It was on threshold. But I could just see by the process that he was using that he's used to producing his voice, making his voice happen. And to ask you to just sort of chill out and let it be was not easy, was it?
It is easy, but Amazing Grace is an old song and has old habits, old bad habits.
You masked them very well.
That are hard to break, yes.
You did very well. Okay, let's move right on. John, what song are you going to sing? Amazing Grace?
Amazing grace.
On threshold?
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Did he get there? I thought you did really well. But there were little moments where you'd back away. You've all heard the little sermonette about the stagecoach driver on the High Mountain Pass, have you? If you haven't, this is a story that's usually given in church sermons about morality. There were three guys applying for the drivership of a stagecoach, and so the owner of the stagecoach lines take them up to a high pass where the space for the stagecoach pass is very narrow. And he says to the first driver, "How close can you come to that edge and still be safe?" And he says, "I can come within 2 feet and feel comfortable." Not to be outdone, the second guy, when asked, says, "I can get within 6 inches and not fall over the edge." Third guy, when asked, says, "I don't know how close I can come, but I'm going to stay as far away from it as I can." You can see the implications for teenagers and morality. But it's also relative to this threshold thing. Lots of people like to flirt with that threshold and drop below it and just kind of hang below. The guy that stayed the farthest away. Yeah. Okay, Scott.
Okay, wait a minute. I got to picture Joe in his underwear. All right. Scary thought.
That wouldn't make me sing better.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Now that's singing very nicely, but it's not threshold. It's got a whole bunch of other stuff because you've been singing for a while and have been trained already. So can you strip it down, so to speak, thinking of Dell in his underwear? Can you just take it at its simplest level and where you're just thinking, amen, and just let it flow out of you. There's part of you that's making it happen.
You're right.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Could you hear the change in that from a kind of a manufactured, impressive but off-putting slightly, to a very inviting sound? And it's just simpler in its construction. That's all it is, just simpler in its construction. And that's where the heart and soul of this lies. Okay, you are Vic.
My Bonnie lies over the ocean.
Did you make it? Did you hit the threshold? Where were you? I think that's exactly right, just a little below. Because there was a little diffusion in the sound, wasn't there? Wasn't it?
My Bonnie.
Don't make it harder, just flow it more.
My Bonnie lies over the ocean.
You hear what happened on the last note? Ocean, ocean. You keep the threshold on the low note as well.
Okay. My Bonnie lies over the ocean.
I hope all of you are going along. You're hearing that there has not been 2 people in a row, or even in the whole group, that sound exactly like anybody else. It is not an issue of trying to make them sound like somebody else. This is the way that each person finds to be themselves at their most healthy way.
My
not good.
My Bonnie lies over the sea.
Now, David, see if I can get you. Not at all. Pretty nervous about it. See if you can stand up tall and get that posture that we talked about first off. Okay? Now just let it flow out of you.
My Bonnie lies over the sea.
That's actually very well done. Go right on.
My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me.
You're using more breath than you usually do? No? Good. You just don't want to let it turn breathy on you. Okay, here we go.
My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean.
It's really low, isn't it? Should we change pitch on this? Let's do. My
Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me.
Now, at this point, you either decide Lon is singing too low and he just doesn't have those low notes, or the other possibility that ought to be examined is to say, does he just habitually drop off of breath and let those low notes have no breath moving through them? And that explains why they become breathy and the rest of the tone is nice. And here's the easiest solution. Where you sing, my Bonnie lies over the ocean. And just take shun. Would you? Just whisper it. Shun. Now intensify the breath. Shun. 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 He's inclined to have a habit of wanting to press it to make it, and then you tighten it, and then you push against it, and you get power out of that. So at this moment, what I would guess, Lon, is that that's just a note that's below your range right now. So the solution for you is to come back for the third level. No, there are some issues. You say that you have a little trouble with your vocal folds, that they don't want to spoke, they don't speak low. Yeah. Yeah. That may have something to do with something you can control. And it may simply be that if you will, on those occasions when your vocal folds don't want to work, if you will do this little game of increased breath energy, you will discover that they will spring to vibration. Shoot, if you had two thumbs sitting down your throat and you got enough wind blowing, they'd start to vibrate. It's just a law of physics. So it may be that at this point, as people get older, one of the things that happens is that they lose moisture on their vocal folds, so they don't vibrate as readily. That you'll hear that happen with lots of people starting anywhere from their mid-60s on up into their 80s. Progressively, the tone just kind of goes like the Godfather's voice. And it just simply is that they lose lubrication in their throat. So there are some things that aren't solvable, but there are also other things that you can find out if it'll work by just putting some breath to it. And if it springs back to life, you've got a chance for it.
That's a question. This is Darrell Clendenin. Question has been going through my mind ever since we started this. I come from sea level.
Yeah.
We're 4,500 foot elevation here. I definitely don't have the air support that I would normally have. I'm coming from a very, very wet climate to a very, very dry climate here. And I can feel that in my throat as well. So,
both of those things are realities. The higher altitude, the dryness, and it takes time to get used to it. But it is possible to get used to it. And the truth is, everybody's sitting down. Are we out of time? Okay. Go ahead and have a seat. Go ahead and have a seat. Now let me walk back where we've been. We've talked about posture, and remember, you've got an assignment when you leave here. I'm going to check you at the door, make sure you got that posture, and I'm going to ask you to walk at least 100 yards that way and at least 100 yards that way. And if along the way you can figure out how to bend over and get a drink at a drink fountain while keeping this posture. Everybody, when they go to drink, they go, and they bend down and they scrunch up their neck to drink, and then they never get straightened out again. Just skip that long and figure out how to get there and squirt water in your eyeball instead of hitting your mouth. It's just one of those weird things. It is a lot easier. But you have that assignment coming. As you watched it played out in the lives of about 70, I don't know how many people, 40 people that are here, you heard individual, unique sounds. As each of you both experimented inside of your own bodies and heard experimenting on other sides, you saw relative levels of success. Some people were desirous to do it and relatively not successful. Does that mean that they can't? No, it just means that they need more time to experiment. And so it should not be that you would ever give up on somebody because they couldn't get it the first time through. You keep trying to set up conditions where they can experience that point where their voice spontaneously springs to motion. And then you amply reward them for having done that. Then along the way there are other issues like lawns that came up where threshold isn't a sufficiency to solve that issue. At which point you say, we've done what we know how to do, I can't solve this right now, wait until I learn a little bit more, or here's somebody I could refer you to take a look and see if that's really a physiological problem or if it's just a habit that you've gotten into. One of the things that we did not get to do and I want to do with you, and I'm going to ask you to stand for one last series of exercises, and that is I want you to find your muscles of inhalation. And you can do this. First, find your posture. Block one nostril. Preferably block the nostril that breathes the best. And leave yourself breathing through the one that is the least effective. And inhale deeply. Watch how your body does when it's got just a little obstacle. If the inhalation works a little bit more vigorously and you feel an expansion at the lower part of your ribs. That is the diaphragm at work. That is the natural way that you're supposed to breathe to sing. Do it one more time. Now let that settle, suspend itself, and that's the position that you want to be in when you're ready to sing. The second thing I want you to do is to feel the muscles of exhalation. Blow on the back of your hand vigorously. Actually block the opening. And you will feel some contraction in the lower part of your abdomen as those muscles go to work to try to expel the breath. Those are the two opposing forces in breath management, and they need to hit an equilibrium. Here's a way that you can get both the muscles of inhalation and the muscles of exhalation working simultaneously. You take yourself a breath, and then you chuckle. Put your hands on your ribs, and you'll find that every time you chuckle, if you do it naturally, your ribs will get a little outward bounce. And then you elongate that like this. My body lies over the ocean. And that feeling of expansion should remain through the whole of the phrase. For many of you, that will be counterintuitive. It will be foreign to what you're accustomed to, and therefore you'll need to kind of coax yourselves perpetually. Oops, didn't do it. My body lies over the ocean. And that sense of equilibrium where these muscles of the lower abdomen are contracting to send air out and the diaphragm is acting as if it's still in the process of inhaling will cause those two muscle sets to engage each other and be connected. One of the ways that you can create that sense of connection is this. Now I need somebody to hold the microphone, and I need another representative, somebody to come forward and help me with the demonstration. John? Okay. Now, John, I want you to take your hands and lean against me here. No, with hands to hands. Okay, now I'm going to put his hands back toward his shoulders. You move back toward your shoulders. Now, push toward me. Go ahead, push. And you'll notice that I'm giving him about equal resistance, but he's winning. He's the muscles that wants to get the breath out of the body, and I'm the muscles that are controlling it. This is what's called breath management. So now if John wants to sing a very gentle phrase, go back and push toward me gently. You'll notice that I'm meeting you with an equal amount of gentility. Now let's say you want to sing very forcefully, and I give you an equal resistance to that. Now, as you're singing, I want you to sing My Bonnie Lies Over the, put it over in front of him. I want you to sing My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, and I want you to push toward me while you're doing it.
My Bonnie lies over the ocean.
Come back.
My Bonnie lies over the sea.
Now you can really feel a sense of connection connection there, can't you? Okay, now here's that's one way where you can get that connection. How do you practice it? You simply lean against the wall and you push yourself away from the wall as you're singing. It creates strength in that engagement. It does. He sure was. Now here's an alternate way to do it. Now instead of pushing, counterbalance, pull back now as you sing.
My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me.
Which of those two connecting ways did you prefer?
They both felt so much easier than what I thought they might be.
Part of it is because he was distracted by doing things with his hands, and so his voice was happening naturally. But the important is whether it's a push or whether it's a pull, there's very much a sense of connection, isn't there? And that sense of connection is essential to hit threshold on a regular basis.
You guys need to experience that, really. It's amazing.
I couldn't do it, so if you want to come back, I'll make sure and include that on the general session. I just ran out of time before I could get there. I did. That sense of connection has to break long enough for a new breath to be taken, and then the engagement happens again. Deborah, you had your hand up, did you? Okay, I think we've carried on as long as we were supposed to. Let's pause for a minute here. Find your posture. I'll greet you at the door. Thank you. And now you can see that you both felt it in your bodies and you heard it being played out in other people's bodies. How well do you think you understand this principle based upon our activities today? Good. So you're in a position on this level to be able to address that topic and diagnose tightness in the throat and a strategy for release, breathiness and a strategy for solving that breathiness, and you have a sense of what the voice sounds like when it hits that balance, right? Find your posture, walk 100 yards, and thank you very much. What? If you did not get your name on the sheet, check to make sure your name is there so that you can get a certificate.